Welcome back, Inebri-art. This is your host, Andy, as always. And we've been getting a fair number of authors on lately, which is not that I don't like musicians, but, sometimes I just don't want to end up being a music podcast. So we have another author today. We have Eileen Lynch with us today, author of Splenditude. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did.
Oh, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So this is your first novel, but not your first writing. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, my debut novel, so to speak. But I have written others and quite a few other things. So.
What made you decide to go with novel? Like, has it always been something you were looking forward to, and just that kind of came together, or like, why novel now?
Um, I've been writing most of my life, and in 2015, I joined a group called the Writers Hotel.
Mm-hmm.
They're a writing service. They live in Maine, but they had conferences every year in New York City. And one of the features of their school was you would submit a full manuscript to them before you came to the conference, and both of the owners, who are editors, writers themselves, would edit your manuscript. And when they started taking my writing seriously, that's when I decided I'm going to go for it.
So would they review the edits at the conference?
No, you would get the edits before you went.
Oh, okay. I was just like, oh, I feel like that would be horrible.
No. But then we'd have workshops with authors there and discuss,
cool.
Maybe 5,000 words, which is about 20 pages.
Yeah.
With about 12 people. And then they decided several years ago to start their own press. So High Frequency Press is a new press that we just launched last weekend in New York.
Oh, it's super new. Are you the first book?
Well, there's 7 of us in
Okay.
the first catalog. So Scott and Shanna, who are the owners of the school, their books, and then 5 other people.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah.
So when you launched were you at the launch of the press in New York, or?
Yes. There's a bar in New York called the KGB.
Okay.
And it's the oldest literary bar, I guess, in terms of readings. There used to be more literary bars, but I think some of them went under during COVID.
Yeah.
But all kinds of famous people have read there, like Joyce Carol Oates and Lemony Snicket, and just a whole range of people. And so they have an area called the Red Room, and it's red. It's like an old speakeasy.
Yeah.
And there's a stage, and we all read from our books, and there was an audience, probably mostly other writers, but it was quite a nice event.
That's awesome. Yeah, we organize a small press event at a local brewery here called Mayflower Brewing Company, and a friend of mine pitched it to me. She's like, "Oh, do you remember those Scholastic book fairs?" And I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "You should do one at a brewery." And I'm like, "I don't want to buy a bunch of books." She goes, "No, you get the authors in and they sell their." I'm like, "Oh, I can totally do that." And this year we might be adding in some reading, so that could be some interesting, so people just don't shop through and they can kind of more spend the day.
Yeah, so. It was very nice. And we sold some of our books afterwards and signed them, and it was pretty exciting.
Yeah. Are you comfortable with reading your stuff like that? I mean, I feel like art and writing can be very, not antisocial is not the right word. Introverted. That's probably the right word. Were you comfortable on stage?
No, I was really nervous before I did it. The only thing that helped me was I had already read at this bar. They had another bar downstairs. And so 2016, 18, and 19, I attended conferences where I had to read in public. And earlier in my career, I took courses at the University of Chicago where that was part of the curriculum. Either the teacher would put read or save. And if she marked read, you had to read at the Woodlawn Tap. So, I had some practice, but still the idea of it made me quite nervous. I mean, we were all on tenterhooks,
Yeah.
And then once we did it, we were really happy, of course.
Yeah. And it's at a bar, so you can always get a little liquid encouragement. So
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. It's reading publicly. I don't mind speaking publicly. That's fine. But reading has always been very stressful for me. I'm dyslexic, so it's like um you know it takes me a lot longer. I tend to mess up words, and so it's that I can find very nerve-wracking if people are kind of like watching me read. But so
Yeah, the nice thing about this is it was a friendly audience. It wasn't like doing stand-up comedy. I mean, nobody heckled us or
yeah.
they listened very.
I was gonna say you have nicer friends than me. I feel like my friends would heckle me worse. So tell us a little bit about your book. What can we expect from Splenditude?
Um, it's a novel about two people that meet. I mean, the novel is about a woman who's committed to writing, but makes a lot of bad choices along the way of her life path. And at one point, she becomes very depressed about not being successful or even accomplishing anything. And she's in a hospital and meets a young man who is also very creative, and they talk a lot during the time that they're there. And then he goes to New York and becomes a successful entertainment producer, whereas she becomes a teacher in a rural Illinois town. And 20 years later, he says, "Oh, let's get together and write a screenplay about our meeting. It would be a great movie." And then, the question is this a relationship? Is it plagiarism? There's a bit of a psychological twist there.
That's always you mentioned stand-up comedy before, and that's always something that I have been kind of not intrigued by, but I find it very curious that the plagiarism thing, especially in the stand-up comedy world, they can get very upset about like people stealing their jokes and whatnot. But it's not uncommon for two comics to kind of generate almost the same exact joke because based on life experience. I don't know, is that something that ever happens like for authors, like where there's just independently two stories that are so similar that it seems plagiaristic?
Well, that becomes a question in the novel, because when she goes to a lawyer, the lawyer says the same thing that you just did, that
Yeah.
5 writers could describe depression the same way, use the same words. And I know it happens in songwriting where people accuse each other of taking, lines and musical riffs. But yeah, it's like the old Chinese saying, there's nothing new under the sun. It's how you present it.
Yeah. That's so I don't want to ask if this is autobiographical, because I mean it sounds like it's got mental health things there, but does any of it parallel your life where she's a writer and you're a writer? And
Yeah, it's definitely fiction in that the scenes and the things that happened to her did not happen to me. What brought me to want to write this is in the last 8 years, I've been working at my local high school in a room for kids with behavioral problems. And, there's a whole range of problems that come to light. And there's kids who are just out of the hospital. There's kids who have depression and anxiety and maybe schizophrenia, or, and watching them go through their lives made me want to write this, because obviously I know something about it, or I know people who have suffered from serious depression. It's not unknown to me, but it was the experience, I think, of working with these kids that really prompted me to say, okay, I'm going to write about it now.
yeah, it's so difficult sometimes you get to, like, I have definitely dealt with some mental struggles and depression and some anxiety, and but it's trying to get people to fully understand what it is. I find can be very challenging. I mean, even like I said, I'm dyslexic. People just kind of jump to, oh, so you read backwards. I'm like, no, it's not like that. Like, that's kind of, I feel like people want a short-handed answer so they can understand things. Um, I was actually talking about something similar last night with a friend of mine, um, where she said she heard this new conspiracy theory that Stevie Wonder isn't blind.
What?
Yeah, and I've heard it before, and there's like a whole like bunch of like examples of how Stevie Wonder isn't blind, and I'm like, well, that's why they don't use the term blind anymore, because it's not accurate. I'm like, he's seeing impaired. I'm like, he probably sees something, but it's probably not enough to go about his day to day life in a quote unquote normal way. And she's like, oh, and I'm like, yeah, some blind slash seeing impaired people can see, but have a super narrow range or can only see in the peripherals. And we had this whole conversation about how like people kind of want that explanation of like, oh, so depression, you're just sad, and it's like, no, it's way more complicated than that. And
Yeah, that's something I hope I've explored in this novel, because the two characters meet in a psych ward, but the way their depression affects them is totally different,
mhm.
and how they go about their lives, and the idea of stigma would really, you know, is important to me, because I feel like more things are out in the open now. Bruce Springsteen has written about depression. He was on the Stephen Colbert show talking about it one time very openly. But I think even so, there's still a stigma to these things, that where people want to hide it or mask it. And I think the more people suffer on some part of the spectrum than we realize. I used to think that everybody was normal, and then a very small percentage of people were not. And um, I think it's something that affects a lot of people or their family members. So yeah, that is a theme that's running through the book.
Yeah, and that's that word spectrum. People be like, oh, blah blah. I'm on this spectrum. I'm on that spectrum. Whatever. I'm like, it's a spectrum. We're all on it. I mean, that's the point of it being a spectrum, you know? And so it's just like, yeah. And, some people are lucky enough that, they can either deal with their depression or it's short lived. Um, Mine was very specific to a time in my life. And like the anxiety still kind of floats around. Um, but it's mine is more connected to like self-esteem issues, and that's like a total offshoot that you tell people, be like, oh, I have self-esteem issues, and they're like, oh, you're a good guy, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, that's not really what that means. That it's way deeper than that. And it's that inner voice that's always incredibly critical. And if I take a day off, that inner voice is like, you're so lazy. And it's like it's very hard to kind of explain to people that don't experience it what it really is.
Yeah, and don't you think in the artistic community that more people experience these types of things?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
That is definitely a recurring topic on this. And my question always is, and I'd like to hear your opinion on this. It's to me, it's like it's very chicken and the egg. Like, which came first? Did you have kind of these mental struggles, and you have developed creativity to kind of help or express yourself, or whatever, or being creative, does that kind of lead to kind of, I don't know if I expressed that right. Is it, because I feel like creative people just have a different way of thinking in general, and that's kind of like what this podcast started. I just feel like most creatives have something dark inside. There's something that they're struggling with, they're working with, they're trying to deal with, and I always wonder if it's, did the creativity come from that? Yeah, I think that's how I should be phrasing it. Does the creativity come from that darkness, or are we creative to kind of try to help deal with that? I think that's what I was trying to get at.
Right. Yeah. Um, One way I try to understand is by studying artists in different disciplines. Um, I used to work in downtown Chicago, and they had at the cultural center they had free concerts, and this is
Mm-hmm.
back in the 2000s, way before COVID. But they had classical and jazz and world music, and it was during the lunch hour, so you could go and do that. And I just loved it because I think musicians approach things differently than writers do. And then, of course, I go to the Art Institute and try and understand painters. I have a few friends who are painters, and I think they think totally differently than I do as a writer. But I can understand more, how they view life than maybe my quote normal boss in the
Mm-hmm.
office. So yeah,
Yeah, that's kind of was the spark behind this podcast. I'm like, even though we're all different and we work in different mediums, I feel like creative people have an easier time talking with other creative people because, you're a writer, I'm an artist, we can still kind of, there's differences, but there's a lot of similarities, there's a lot of crossover. And some of my favorite creatives to talk to are chefs.
oh,
They're super fun and really weird people. And yeah, so they have a very different way of looking at it. And I have a bartender friend that is he wouldn't call himself a chef, but a cook. Ooh. And he talks about missing the kitchen because he's missing that creativity behind coming up with new dishes and specials and stuff like that.
yeah, that should be my next field of inquiry because I've never interviewed chefs.
It's super fun, and sometimes they bring snacks.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that sounds good.
yeah. One of our very first episodes, we had Chef Mike Morway, who apparently I went to high school with, and I don't remember going to high school with him. I only remember him in my adult life. And he's done a couple of those cooking competitive shows, and he showed up for the interview and he brought like chicken wings with him, and we're like, this is the best day ever. We're gonna have chefs on all the time.
For sure.
Yeah.
The chef that I've heard speak a lot is Chef Jose Andres,
Okay.
and my nephew lives in DC, so he took us to one of his restaurants, which was a work of art in itself. I mean, the drinks and how things were presented, and then he became very active with different disasters. I don't know if he went to Haiti first, but now he has the World Central Kitchen where he teams up with chefs all over the world, and when there's any type of disaster, they go in and cook for people, like in Ukraine. And
Oh, that's really cool.
yeah, it's you should look into it because it just reminded me his creativity is like, why can't we send 5 chefs there and work with local chefs, and we'll send a bunch of supplies and food and we'll help people. And I'm thinking, why can't the government do this? But here's this really creative chef who's saying we can feed people.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of those things that I was telling you right before we started, kind of the grassroots of how Inebri-art got started. And initially, I was working a dead end retail job, and I hated it. And I'm like, oh, maybe this Inebri-art's the way to kind of get myself out of it. And so I started to try to run some classes and try to make money through it. And then that didn't really seem to catch on. And then I gave up on that and was just like, well, what can I do to kind of, you know, find places to hang my friend's artwork and you know, what other things that can I do to kind of like get more people exposed to art? And that's when things took off.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. So do you, I mean, you were a teacher. Did you use your creativity to kind of give that kind of thing back to the kids, or how did your writing help with that? Because I mean, if they're kids who have some issues, I'm sure that was incredibly challenging. So.
Yeah, and so I didn't have time to get my teaching certificate. I actually did teach English as a second language some time ago, but so I was a paraprofessional, and they had this room called the Shield Room, and I was put in there, and they noticed that I could relate to these kids because I was quiet but kind of a kamikaze English tutor. I'd say, "Oh, you've got a Catcher in the Rye paper duo. Let's sit down and talk about it." And I tell them, "Did you know that J.D. Salinger had the manuscript with him when he went to D-Day in World War II?" And I tried to get them to be, do some offbeat things to get them interested. And so I've been doing that for 8 years, and I'm retiring in a couple of weeks. But it has been interesting because it's kind of like anything that I could think of to get them interested. Like, you should be able to express yourself in
Mm-hmm.
writing. And some of them were surprised when they actually started doing it. And not every story was a success story. It wasn't like the Hallmark Hall of Fame or anything, but it's been really rewarding to approach language that way. I think everyone has language in them somewhere, to try and get it out on paper.
Yeah, like I've had that happen fairly recently. We run like paint nights, but we do like beer mug painting and wine glass painting and margarita glass painting. And I've had a couple of people kind of like start asking me questions about like where do you get the paint? What kind of paint is this? And then after like talking with them for a few minutes, these are the people who walked in and been like, "Oh, I can't paint. I can't paint. I'm just here to have fun." And then at the end, they're like talking about going to get paint and do it on their own. And I'm like, yeah, like it's not every piece is the Mona Lisa. It's about the process of doing it that is, I think, the helpful mental part of it. That's when I feel at ease, is when I'm drawing and everything kind of falls away.
Definitely. An English teacher that I worked with asked me to speak to her creative writing class yesterday. And, I talked about specific things about my writing journey. But I also said, find something that you can do, that you like to do, they're putting you on a track to go to work, or, but you need to have something if you want to be the best cupcake baker in the world, or you want to make your car into a lowrider or something. Find out how to do it. Find out the best person who can teach you too. And you, your life's going to be more fun and interesting if you have something besides just your job. And
Yeah.
it's hard to tell with kids these days are very inward because their phones and they're plugged in, and sometimes you don't know if you're reaching them or not. But I wanted to give them that pep talk.
Yeah. And it is, it's like finding that thing that brings you joy. You don't have to become a professional artist. Like if it brings you joy, like that's really important. And I've had a lot of friends, who have started families and have kids, and I'm always kind of like, "Hey, man, don't forget, you need you time. You need to have fun, and because it not. I have two kids. I love my kids, but sometimes you're like, hey, I need some time, and you do you, and it's I think people tend to forget that, and they put their life into their work and their family, and they forget that they need to do something for themselves.
Yeah, a person I really admire is the person who does my hair, and she has 3 kids, more on the grown side now, but she paints, she plays piano, she's a great cook and baker, and that's where and she's also really good, doing hair. But I just think she's happier because she's not on the screen all the time, and she makes things.
Yeah, and then you can share what you make with other people, and bring your cupcakes on a podcast. I don't know. So when you have these writing conferences, is it like, how do those work? Like, do you do writing there, or is it more just kind of discussing what you have written and kind of getting feedback on what you've written, or do like, I know comics get together to write jokes, which I always find a little strange, but it kind of makes sense because a lot of times you're like, is this funny in my head, and I need to say it out loud, to see if it is funny, and then the other person can kind of give you immediate feedback. But is that kind of thing going on at the writers conference? Like, what are they like?
Yeah, we do both of those things. So there's 12 people usually or around that in a workshop, and you get 20 pages from a manuscript of each person before you go, and you read it probably a couple times, and you write a page of commentary, critique, and on site, it's almost like a big English class. You go around and each person comments on what they found in the other person's work. And that, it's a good portion. It's like 3 hours over 4 days. So it's a 12-hour workshop. And it's amazing how much you can understand somebody by reading 20 pages of their writing.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
But the thing we also do is they call it generative writing. And so part of the time, the instructor will give you a prompt, and you'll write for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. One of the ones I really liked at the last conference I went to was write the missing chapter of the person's work next to you. So somebody's writing.
Fun.
Yeah. And then in the afternoon, they have craft labs and these are all published authors, and they'll come in and talk about a certain aspect of craft, and they'll also give you prompts to write that you can. Some people bring stuff home and start new stories based on what they wrote.
Yeah.
At the conference. So.
Yeah, that writing thing where you give the person next to you writes the next chapter reminds me. There's an art thing. I don't even know what you exactly call it, but they call it exquisite cadaver. And you fold the paper usually like in 3, and the first person draws on like 1/3, but with a little bit kind of hanging over into the second, and then you fold that so you can't see it, and then the second person draws on the center third, starting from the lines it carried over, and then the third person gets like just the narrowest piece with a few lines, and then they build it, and so you unfold it and see what the piece comes out as. It's very fun. Yeah, I love that kind of weird collaborative, almost like Mad Lib kind of thing.
Yeah. It does sound like fun. They also have readings at night, so then you go and listen to people, and it's just people from the conference, so it's not as nerve-wracking as reading in public. But
so
yeah, go ahead.
How are you with? Because like as you're, so I don't know how many people go to these, but even if there's like 20, now you have 20 people giving you feedback on your work. Do people get upset? Because I feel like some people take criticism fantastic. Not everybody. Like some people are not great at taking criticism.
That's a really good question, because what I like about this particular conference is the people who run it. They run their own workshops, and then other writers, there might be 5 or 6 or 8 workshops going on during the week, and they don't let it get out of control. I understand that in some MFA programs, writers will go after each other, and I think it stems from the fact that there's not enough places for everyone to publish. So there's some competitiveness, jealousy. I was at one conference where a lady she wasn't really going after me, but she wanted to criticize the characters were not suited for each other. And she wasn't, pretty emphatic about it. And I just looked at her and said, well, they broke up, because
Well, you're right. That's why they're not together. Yeah.
yeah. But writers are also passionate too, and because they could start like rewriting your piece. They hear what you're saying, and they're like, "Oh, but you should do this and that," instead of going into what the piece is, and and not changing it into something else. So you have
Yeah.
to be diplomatic.
Yeah, and it's always, when you're doing something creative, you're really kind of like you said, you get to know someone just by reading 20 pages. So it's like you're on that page, and when someone's critical of it, they're kind of being a little bit critical of you. And so it can be really easy to get offended by it.
Yeah, one of my friends that I met at the first workshop said, "Well, take what you can use and burn the rest." And I've just been reading this book by an art critic named Sebastian Smee, and it's about artistic rivalries where the people are friends, but they're also competitors. Like Manet and Degas
Hmm.
were working closely together, but they also spurred each other on because the one would go into a new phase of his art, and the other one would be like, "Oh, what am I doing? I'm just sitting around. Now I've got to go into my next phase." And I mean, I'm simplifying it too much, but those relationships are important, and if you can get someone to make you see like, okay, this is a good idea, but you really have to work on it, that's helpful.
Yeah. Literally the guy that was kind of the spark that started the drink and draw that then became Inebri-art. Um, he draws unbelievably fast to the point where if we're drawing like at a figure drawing group, I can't sit near him because it gets in my head, and I'm like kind of like looking at what he's doing. I'm like I'm way behind. And he's always he would draw very strange. Like when you go to art school, they're like, oh, you need to lay out the pose, so you get the whole pose down, and then go back and kind of refine the details. But he'll just start with like the hand, and then go down the arm, and then go to the shoulder, and then up to the head, and then over to the other shoulder, and down, and it's all in the right proportion. And it would drive me crazy because I'm like, I can't draw like that. And so, he's a great friend, but I just can't sit near.
Yeah, right.
And then weirdly enough, like in the past year or so, I started getting really into single line drawings where you just put the pen down and never pick it up. And then halfway through one of the drawings, I'm like, ah, oh, damn it, I'm doing exactly what he told me to do. But it just I was not in that headset. And, like 2 years later, I finally got there, and it was, now I'm drawing more like that, and he's on to something else.
Yeah, that's interesting how
Yeah.
that works. And
How do you get yourself in the mindset to write?
when I first started writing, regularly, I was on the train. I had a long commute, so I would write on the train. And then I would write every Saturday morning for 3 hours. And so my brain got used to that. And now I write almost every day. But I love doing it. It's my sanctuary, or the place where I can arrange the world. And I'm not like, I mean, some writers are like, oh, I just can't do this. And I'm like, well, then do something else if you don't like it. But there's the different components of the creative part where you're coming up with something new, and then you go into the editing phase, which is more like carpentry, and you're taking your sentences and making sure each sentence is good, and it's a little different from the wild creating
Yeah.
part.
Do you have to, like, in the editing phase, is that where you kind of start to think of like pacing, like where you're like, is the too slow, too, like I'm thinking more like scripts. I don't know. Like when you write a novel, do you have to think about the pacing?
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm kind of obsessed with that because you know I've been reading for a long time, and I read the old style from the 1800s where they would take you up the drive to the estate and describe every single thing about the house in this town, and now it's like you have to jump right into the action right away. Maybe go back and sketch some stuff, but that might help me decide whether to keep reading a book or not if the pacing is off.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, again, not much of a reader, so that's gonna be why I never. But it's interesting. Like it was definitely like a COVID thing, but I haven't forgotten about it. Like I started writing some, and I'm like, it's scratches all the right itches for like creativity wise, but it is just it's a different, like the same thing. Like I like cooking as well, so like I like to do anything. I like to bring something into existence that didn't exist before. I think that's really the thrilling part.
Yeah, and when you mentioned cooking, I do a lot of cooking, and after writing, because like this book took 5 years to write, and dinner I can go down and make it and eat it, and I do put care into my cooking and thought and stuff, but it's making something that I can see right away, and that feels good too.
Yeah, I'll like find a dish and be like, oh, I want to learn to make that, and then I'll kind of like keep at it. I mean, the day to day cooking, that's fine, that's fun, but like I really like to find kind of something out of the ordinary. Like the last one I kind of got obsessed with was paella.
Oh,
Yeah.
sounds.
And the new one, I haven't tried it yet. It seems really simple. Is shakshuka. It's
What
like
is?
a tomato stew that you poach eggs in, and it's like a Middle Eastern breakfast. And then you kind of just eat it with like you just kind of like scoop bread into it, and it looks amazing.
I saw a picture of it, and I've never eaten it, or so that's
Yeah,
interesting.
so it's really just a matter of me taking the time to be like, oh, I'm gonna make that on this day, and then making sure I have all this. I mean, everything else, like everything in it's like pretty simple. It's just, I think some of the spices are not sure if are in my cabinet. That's really. But what's your favorite thing to cook?
Um, in the winter, I make a lot of stews and soup. I really like it. I guess peasant food.
Yeah,
But,
yeah. I like. I'm not a big soup person, but I do like making kale soup. Um, Around Thanksgiving, I make turkey soup from leftovers. That's always fun.
yeah, that's really
But,
good.
yeah. So, um, so we make sure that the PR people are happy. Where can people go to find Splenditude?
It's up on Amazon and Barnes and Noble right now. Um, it comes out June 26th. You can pre-order it though on
Oh, so it's
Amazon.
up for pre-order right now.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Are you going to be doing an audiobook?
I don't know. I should investigate that.
Because some of us don't like to read.
No,
Yeah.
I understand. I mean, it's
Yeah.
something I actually should look into because some of my colleagues at work love audiobooks because they're so tired of looking at their computers all day and they want to, cook and listen to a book or do
Yeah.
whatever they're doing. So,
Yeah. It's funny. We've been podcasting for years, and people, some podcast advice people are like, oh, you should have transcripts of your podcast, um, because a lot of hearing impaired people will read them if they can't hear it. And I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. But we're like 450 episodes, and that just seems incredibly daunting.
yeah, it does. When you mentioned that, I thought,
Yeah.
oh, wow, yeah.
So I'm like, there's got to be an AI that'll do it. But, you know,
Yeah,
so.
I listened to a podcast from Patty Smith, and she'll have a transcript running on the side.
Oh,
But,
really? That's cool.
yeah.
Huh. I mean, they have to, like, I know YouTube videos will just give, um, like closed caption. I think the real trick becomes separating who's speaking. you know, and if it's just in written form. Um, because they did find one program that would do it, but it was literally like speaker one, speaker two, and speaker three, and then you had to go in and change. Like you couldn't even type who they were, and it would go and automatically change it. So I was just like, it's too much work. So, but
Yeah, I understand.
yeah. Do you have another book that you're like? Do you have novel number two already kind of like in the works, or?
Actually, yeah, it's a collection of short stories. So I'm pretty far into the drafting stage of that, and then I'll go into super edit mode.
Super edit mode?
Well, my teachers have this method I haven't seen anywhere else where they call it the spanking machine, but you know how
Okay.
you don't want to use certain words over and over again, I like words that are very recognizable.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
they also have you do that with um, conjunctions and small words. And, like how many times are you using the in this manuscript? And you're thinking, well, nobody's going to notice that. But having gone through the process, I realized my sentences got a lot better
Oh,
because
interesting.
the reader hears it. Like say you have a paragraph and you use the word the 6 times in it,
Hmm.
and it's in the back of your mind, probably, like music. It's like, so it's very wildly tedious to do, but it's a good thing.
Yeah, that's something that I learned when I got into podcasting. I'm like, wow, I say that word an awful lot. And so then you dump that word and then you replace it with something else. And you're like, nah, I'm just doing the same thing. So it is trying to kind of keep it fresh and interesting and not repetitive and, not tell the same story 15 episodes in a row. And yeah, so it can be pretty crazy. So,
Right. Or
but
if you're always telling a story in the same way or going driving in the same direction, and like, okay, we get that, your mother was mean to you or whatever you're,
right. Yeah.
but,
I'm sure my listeners are like, we get it. You're dyslexic. And we get it. But it comes up a lot when with authors, like because they'll be like, "Oh, do you want me to send you a copy of the book?" I'm like, "That's really sweet, but I'm probably not going to read it, and it's not you, it's me." Um, but yeah, so and it is, it. But I think that's the fun part of doing this is you kind of, as much as I get to meet other people, there's a bit of it where I'm like continuing to look back at myself and in a conversation like a story that I haven't thought about in years will come up and then it gets recorded and I've had that thought like both my parents have passed and when I'm gone someday, if my kids were really interested, there's some 700 episodes that they could listen through and hear stories of my life and people I know and and it like when I think I'm like, oh, that would have been so cool to have of my parents.
right. Yeah. My father wrote, his job was in insurance, but he wrote a play, and I read parts of it when I was younger, but then last year over Christmas break, I read the whole play again. And after having spent a lot of time writing myself, it was just revelatory, to see what his life was like as a child and growing up on the south side of Chicago during the Depression, and quite different from the suburban existence that we led with him. And I think we're always rewriting our life stories or reevaluating them, and it's quite interesting.
Do you have you considered putting the play on?
I haven't. I used parts of it in a short story, so I have
Yeah.
been incorporating. Yeah, it was part of the Hull House Writers Workshop in the '60s, and it was the man who ran it was quite well known in the
Hmm.
that circle, and I learned a lot about writing dialogue from my father because we'd go somewhere and he'd be like, "Hey, listen to those people over there," and like the way they would talk or the way they would say things. And yeah, I just wish you were around to know this.
Yeah. Writing dialogue, that's interesting. I've never thought about like really kind of like listening to people talk in your surroundings to kind of hear dialogue, I guess. But I, like I said, I was doing a little bit of writing during COVID. That's one of the things that I found very difficult. Like if I didn't have kind of an image of like who this character was, I had a really hard time writing how they talk. They just sound like me, I guess.
That's the hardest thing. Like when you first start, there was one novel I worked on with them at the workshop, and all the characters sounded like they came from the same place, or the same block or the same. And once I learned how to differentiate, and I try to write with how people speak in Chicago. I had this one proofreader, the dialogue, it said Cubs won, and she changed it to the Cubs won. Well, nobody would say the Cubs won. And somebody else would say, Eileen, that really isn't that important. But
Oh, sure it is. If you want them to be from Chicago,
yeah.
I immediately thought of like at least half a dozen things and that's one of the things that people in this, like I live just south of Boston, in this area, who get really uptight about is actors trying to do Boston accents. And the worst part is even the ones who are from here can't do it.
I've heard them speaking about that on interview shows, and it's true. It's a very distinct.
It's very distinct, and once you lose it, it's really hard to get back. Because what was it? The Departed. Like Matt Damon's in it, and his Boston accent's not great, and he's from here.
Yeah.
but Mark Wahlberg, dead on. Like he still talks like he's from here. I don't know if he just never lost his accent, but yeah, it's those little things like if you're from Plymouth, you don't refer to Plymouth Rock, it's just the Rock. And it's subtle, but it's no.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, no one around Boston calls Boston Beantown. That's a tourist thing.
Okay, yeah. I won't do that. In Chicago, they always refer to the lake. The lake is Lake Michigan.
Yeah.
And if you're in the suburbs, you always talk about the city. And I live really far out of Chicago now. And to me, the city is Chicago. And people will be like, which city do you mean? Rockford, Crystal Lake. And like, no. But yeah, it's.
Yeah. Yeah. A friend of mine went to college and she was relaying a story. Oh no, she was in the military and she was relaying a story of when she was in college. And she's like, yeah, that's when I was living in town. And they're like, we thought you said you lived in Boston. And she's like, I did. And they're like, yeah, but that's a city. And she's like, yeah. And she's like, but you just said in town. And like, yeah, that's what we say. Like, you go in town means Boston. Like, I don't know why. They just do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's, I love, oh man, we've been talking. So I had an author on maybe 5 or 6 episodes ago. Her name's Karen Stoles now. And she wrote a book called Bitch. And it's the history of the word. And ever since that one, language keeps popping up. And like, it's, to me, language is so fascinating about why we use certain words. And, it's, and we're from Massachusetts. We all talk funny out here. So.
But that's good.
Yeah. What is one, before we go, what is one Chicago slang that is simply like only people in Chicago know what you're talking about?
They say the front room, which is supposed to mean the front room of your house.
Yeah.
The front room.
The front room?
Yeah.
Interesting. Is it always like a living room or is it just whatever room is in front?
I think it's a living room.
Yeah,
huh. And We talk about the stoop, that your front steps
Yeah,
are called the
that
stoop. I think they use that in Philadelphia and
yeah, we
other.
use that too. Um, yeah, I think one of my favorite ones that we use out here is a nip, and I think it's awesome. Like one other weird place, like Minnesota or something, but it's an airplane bottle or a mini bottle of liquor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we call them nips, and it's just one of those weird things that for whatever reason it just that's what we say, and it's so ubiquitous here that if you go elsewhere in the country, like you don't realize that other places in the country don't use that term until you go there, and people are like, "What are you talking about?" So
That's actually perfect.
yeah. Um, so I want to say thank you for your time, and this is an absolute pleasure. So when your short story book is ready, hit us up. We'll come. We'll talk. We'll talk more.
Great. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
No problem. Listeners, go check out Eileen Lynch's book, or you can pre-order it. You can't check it out yet. It comes out June when?
26.
June 26th. Splenditude, a coming of age story about writers and mental health and whatnot. So, Eileen, thank you again so much, and listeners, we'll see you guys again next week. And thanks for checking out the show today, listeners. If you enjoyed the content today, you can go over to patreon.com/Inebri-art to support the show. You can join over there for just a few dollars a month and help us provide this fun content that you just checked out. You can also email us at inebriart.com with your questions, complaints, and concerns, or you can find us on all social medias at Inebri-art or at Inebri-art6 on Instagram. And also don't forget to check out our other shows, Bar Talk Podcast, Old Colony Cast, Inebri-art, and all the other shows on the Inebri-art Network, which you can find at inebriart.com. Thanks again for listening.